Hey everyone, and welcome back to another report. This time, we're talking about a consumer victory as we look back into the past, a type of BS that finally seems to have been rejected by audiences, one that seems uniquely misused in gaming as corporate AAA puts their developers under insane pressure and sells customers down the river. Roadmaps. We love to hate them. They are tools to communicate intent. They're supposed to be a means to measure progress. Why then are they synonymous with broken games, dashed hopes, and the abuse of consumer goodwill? Easy. The AAA industry intends to make as much money as possible from us. They intend to create games that will have players enjoying their time and giving lots of money over in return. And most of that's quite reasonable. Actions and intent, however, are not always aligned. And as such, roadmaps have often become empty promises, or as, some of us like to call them, lies. Roadmaps came across as a PR-friendly way to communicate development plans initially. To say that, they started recently, that would be a lie, as they're fundamentally just an extension of, anyone communicating their plan or, say, a season pass. As live services took over in recent years, though, the idea of post-launch DLC was replaced by updates. Now, season passes, they were one of the ways the developers charged more at a game's launch. They were, I think, a bit more straightforward and upfront, but they fell away as live service games sort of had less defined futures and the business model shifted. A few years ago, a AAA purchase would be a mostly complete game at $60. You could maybe get some extra content or cosmetics for a bonus edition, or on top of that, you could buy the next year of downloadable content for $30 to $40. Now, given how the industry catapulted towards this model, it was obviously a profitable venture. However, with the move to live service games, developers started to rely more and more on profitable microtransactions, and they could no longer really justify doubling the price of games with season passes. And that sort of meant only one thing: they had to cut somewhere. I think now we're seeing games release with less and less features being less complete. Selling actual content turns out is a lot less profitable than just selling cosmetics, boosts, and the like, so that's the obvious move that's really happened here. The sooner the game releases, the sooner players can dive into the ecosystem, the Skinner box, and drip feed money into the in-game store. So if that's your goal and the game's got to get out as quickly as possible, then yeah, communicating a roadmap is a vital component of running that scheme. They are an advertisement of the future, but, admission to that future costs $60 right now. Some parts of AAA are selling early access games, but without that classification or the associated price drop. Waiting for a game to be complete, in a year or two and be cheaper, that now is the smart move. But of course, you've got FOMO, you've got the hype train, and you've got gaming culture. And that is why selling ideas via roadmap is, easier than making a complete quality product, and that is what the industry's been doing. I mean, that's even apparent from, say, the Epic Store. That used a roadmap, begging for forgiveness for their failings and promising change. So with all of this, how the hell do roadmaps actually get people to buy what I think we all obviously know are half-baked games like Anthem? It's promise. Despite everything, we live in a trusting society. When an entity, a person, or a business makes a promise, we do tend to believe them. If we just see something printed in black and white, you tend to believe it. Now, the thing is, in broad society, that's largely backed up by years of legislation to protect consumers. When purchasing from a reputable source, products are as described. Warranties are upheld. We've got a lot of regulations, say, in the UK to protect consumers, and we've all heard the term, the customer is right. When things go wrong, there are protections in place for most segments of business. And that does mean that for most purchases that people make in their lives, there's a bit of trust there. And that actually does apply over to the gaming audience, who, yes, do largely trust what they see and hear. And that's even after years of abuse. It's a hard habit to break, and it's one that ends up rewarding reprehensible behavior from gaming companies. Now, gaming is a young and open industry. AAA is no stranger to anti-consumer practices, from, say, blocking game resales to awful refund policies. We kind of heard it all. We've had a history of bullshots, unrepresentative demos, and far worse. We've made some ground on some of these fronts recently, which is a very heartening thing, especially with better refund policies, but all in all, consumers in this industry are really quite forgiving. Beyond that, the hobby and culture are so deeply ingrained that many jump to the defense of anti-consumer practices because that company represents their culture. Now, that's a discussion for another day, but it's an important part of this. And a part of the reason why the industry can get away with a lot of this stuff is just a lack of process in punishing anti-consumer behavior. Much of the situation is very much just a let the buyer beware, and that's kind of where it's left. Roadmaps are a prime example of this. Many developers just aren't bound to promises, beyond reputation amongst consumers, and losing rep with customers actually turns out it's not as damaging as it really should be. And I think it's just this attitude and trend that's led to a slippery slope of things getting worse. But that said, this is a good video because roadmaps have accompanied so much disgusting behavior this year that I think they're fading off. The industry, I think, is slowing down and revealing games years in advance, and these abject failures are actually kind of heartening. It looks like a trend that was misused so severely that the core audience is, just having absolutely none of it anymore. Releasing games that aren't anywhere close to being done. That reached its zenith this year with Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and look what happened there. That game actually failed so hard, it cascaded Ubisoft's entire lineup, and just look what it did to their stock price. However, in some ways, the roadmaps themselves aren't to blame. They're just a tool, after all. The anti-consumer angle applies intentionality as if these things are being drawn up while the producers are just sitting there laughing at the customer's expense, which, we have to be fair, is not really that realistic. Realistically, roadmaps are a development team's schedule with a PR twist. Releasing these to the public is a promise, and it heightens the stakes. I think it's actually unfair on developers. Missing an internal milestone is a problem, but missing it while the public is holding you accountable because they purchased something, that's a disaster. Anthem is a prime example of this. They set out a roadmap, and then they kind of had to go back on it when their plans weren't working. They were still working on the game, but, there was kind of nothing to show for it there. Everyone who purchased Anthem gave EA money, but they will never get what was promised at launch. And hell, even with the Epic Store, they had to kill their roadmap after not meeting deadlines. Fallout 76 is a different example, and it shows something else, and sort of underlooked downside to roadmaps, because when they're used as a measure for progress, they can cause absolute havoc. Fallout 76, except for a delay in Wastelanders, pretty much did keep to their roadmap schedule, something which few developers have ended up accomplishing, so props to them there. But if that's how they're measuring success internally, then you can see why the game is a buggy, broken mess, because their number one priority will have been to maintain the roadmap. Plans revealed a year ago are not going to be the best thing for the game now. We talk about agile development versus waterfall. Waterfall's generally a bad idea, especially, say, in games. Yet that's kind of what these roadmaps end up, kind of doing. And take a game like, say, World of Warcraft or maybe Final Fantasy XIV, like an MMO. Those are not really games that say, 12, 24 months in advance what their plan is. Blizzard will announce the release date for a patch, a month or two beforehand. And that's generally, sometimes even less, and that's generally for good reason, because they know in development things can change. And I think the MMO sector of the industry has probably known that for a good amount of time. But we've kind of seen the rest of the industry really being slapped by that now. And it's obvious in broken promises and games that maybe do technically keep their promises, like 76, but at the cost of quality. Then also, they're just plain risky for the huge, chaotic development teams to actually, rely on. A lot of these AAA studios, they put their money where their mouths are, and they end up coming extremely short. And also, there's a lot of human cost there in maintaining the roadmap. Now, that said, for all their negative press, they can be useful tools for games in active development. We've only got to be fair. There are examples across the board of roadmaps being great ways to communicate your plans with your players. Rainbow Six Siege, Destiny 2, they have had pretty reasonable roadmaps, saying what bit of content goes live when. That's good for the players of the games. In the indie world, roadmaps are often used for early access games to pretty good effect, at least, if the game is not abandoned, which sometimes unfortunately happens. The good examples aren't always on time, yes, but there's usually a well laid out plan. And I think indies are also held a bit more accountable to their users because there's a more personal connection, and that kind of has fostered a sort of a give and take of expectations. Risk of Rain 2 is actually a great example of this working out. Each update roughly on time with the roadmap, players have actually came, back into the game. The graph of reviews in Steam actually tells the story excellently. The Risk of Rain 2 roadmap let players know when they should come back to the game for, a great new experience, and they pretty much did, and they left good reviews. And next, just upping the budget slightly from Risk of Rain 2, we've got Star Citizen, and yes, Chris Roberts and Elon Musk seem to promise features at a similar timescale, and for all the controversies and the transgressions, if you actually go onto it, Star Star Citizen runs a really good roadmap. Theirs is basically a Trello board that is in-depth and up-to-date. Now, Trello's, like a project management tool. So if you're an engaged fan, then that is a great way to track that development. It's pretty much an ideal way to communicate your roadmap. I mean, Apex Legends, they opened a Trello board earlier on in the year, and even Modern Warfare has done this now. That's all actually pretty good. And I think what it helps is accountability and transparency in development, and that seems to be evolving out of the idea of roadmaps. So there are some positives here. And in the case of Star Citizen, I think, some more people just, understand a bit more of the dev process, which probably is a good thing. So to bring this all together, roadmaps are a tool that the AAA, right? Imagine Jim Sterling saying AAA, that type of AAA, it's one that they've used to really screw over customers, but they actually kind of failed. Over the last year or so, there have been so many broken promises that the camel's back it's actually through the floor. It's so broken. The lies have been recognized for what they are, and that's really good for customers. Best of all, the developers who actually put their money where their mouth is, well, they found them to be a good way to communicate with their players. We're going to have to wait and see what the new enemy of 2020 is, what sort of new scheme to sell us onto a game pretty quickly is. I certainly don't think it's going to be roadmaps. I think customers have been burnt enough that if a big new game comes out and, it's pretty sparse at launch, but they've got a really expansive roadmap and it's from one of those sort of known culprits, I actually think customers might be a little bit more suspicious. And that might mean that, less people get screwed out of money that could have went to a better place, and I think that's a good thing. So here's to consumers being more aware. Here's to consumers actually seeing what's going on and saying no to it. Let me know, what do you think about this topic? What do you think is a good roadmap? What is a developer who's given you a roadmap, stuck to it, or maybe deviated from it, but explained it well and been really well engaged? I want to see good examples and bad examples, so let me know what your experiences have been down below. With that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon.